Okay, I wanted to do a quick video here of just how to roast your own coffee at home. Now, I'm using an electric stove, and you have to be careful when you start roasting coffee indoors because if you run too high of heat, then you're going to smoke up your place. So make sure you have an exhaust fan and don't get excited. A lot of times, I usually use about a cup, but a lot of times on this coffee, um, the great thing about home roasting is you can pick out the bad beans and different things like that. So you just want to kind of, coat the bottom of the pan, and not a lot, because if you do, you'll do like I do and you'll smoke up the house. So start off on about a 4 on electric range, I think. And what you want to do is, just start off with a good medium heat. Now, there's several different ways or roast of coffee, and a lot of it is based on how dark it is. You have a light roast, medium dark, full on dark. But they call it a city roast, a city full, full city roast plus. There's a lot of different things, but basically, what you take away from that is the darker the roast, the stronger the coffee. So what I'm roasting today is Robusta. This is from Vietnam, and Robusta is a little, it puts you in mind of the old frontier coffee, instant coffee, when you're able to get the fresh green beans and roast them yourself. Now, the one thing about coffee, the green beans can keep for 5 to 10 years and not lose any flavor. But once you roast it, roasted beans are good for about 2 weeks before they start getting stale. So what you want to do is, and again, that's why you don't want to roast a lot of coffee at any given time. But once you roast the beans, some say let it set for 24 hours. You don't really have to. I grind up my beans as soon as they were cooled down, and so I like to use a wooden spoon. I don't like to use a metal spatula or anything like that. You can use non-stick skillets, any skillet. Some people like to use cast iron or stainless steel. It doesn't matter. And so I will let this heat up, and then now with Robusta, again, you have usually a smaller bean than Arabica, and also on I've noticed during roasting is the chaff or the parchment that comes off of the Robusta beans isn't as bad as the Arabica. When I'm doing especially Brazilian Arabica, it seems to have a lot of that chaff that after the beans go through what's called the first crack, and it's kind of like popcorn but not as intense. So you'll hear a first crack, and that's some people like to stop after that, and that's about medium light, kind of like on the light side on roast. If you allow the beans to roast further, they will go through what's called a second crack. Now, after that, you have to be on your toes and make sure that you don't over roast them and get charcoal, which isn't good to drink. Okay, as you can see, the beans are starting to turn brown. Now, so once they get brought up to a certain temperature, that's when the actual roasting process starts. Coffee beans are not like cocoa beans. Cocoa beans, you have to start off with a high heat, and then, because that separates the nibs inside the seed itself, and then reduce the heat. With coffee, you want to, some start off with a lower heat and bring it up, actually, so it's kind of the reverse. But what I found out works really good is just start off with good consistent heat straight through the roast, and of course, keep an eye on it and stir the beans, and make sure that you're getting a nice even roast. And that's also a little trick. With a larger pan, you can move the beans around a little bit better and use the large eye on the stove. Don't use the small eye because your heat will be much more even with the larger eye. So again, this is probably a very, very light roast. You'll notice as the beans get hot, kind of a grassy smell. Some people like it, some don't. I've grown kind of accustomed to it, so it's really nice. And then as the beans get darker, that's when you begin to really smell the coffee, and that's what I like. Is later, near completion of the roast, it just smells awesome. And so I'll get back to you as soon as we start the first crack. And then with the Robusta, I do about a medium roast. I don't really roast it very dark, because if you do, then it's going to be really strong. Okay, as you can see, the coffee is really turning nice colors. And the darker it gets, like I said, you can hear it start to pop. Now this is called first crack. So that's when you first hear the popping or cracking sound, and that's you're starting to get into medium roast. So you really, and I bumped the heat up to a 6. So I went from a 4 to a 6 to finish my roast. And this is the critical part in roasting. So you can start seeing some of the oil come out of the beans right there. And this is when you can start to see the smoke. Now I've got the exhaust fan. I have the exhaust fan off because it's so loud, but this is where you have to be really careful and not burn your beans. So as you can see, it's starting to get smoky. We'll turn the exhaust fan on again, and then, but we're in the final, oh, you can see the glossiness of the beans. But at this stage, it's very, very important to keep the beans moving. Coffee beans have to be stirred. Now in Africa, this is where I learned about this, the open pan roasting, and this is what we do here is, well, we do outside roasting, because a lot of coffee beans indoors, yeah, you will smoke up your place and set off fire alarms. So as you can see, the beans are getting really dark now, and from here it's just a matter of preference. After the first crack, like I said, you'll go through the second crack, but you have to be careful because you will get them charred, and then it's not even drinkable coffee. But so long as you keep the beans moving in the pan, keep stirring, and until you get to a roast that you like. Like I said, Robusta typically does good with about a medium, not much more than a medium dark roast on, and that's why I found out it's got the best flavor on the Robusta. So, and also, as soon as your roast is done, take the beans out of the pan so that they can begin to cool, and stir them around in a bowl. And that way the beans can stop roasting. You have to remove them from the heat or they'll just keep roasting and basically be undrinkable. I have some real good popping going on now. You can hear it. So I'm going to turn on my exhaust fan and then show you the final product. And there's our finished product on a good, now this is just going into the first crack. This is not a very dark roast. I don't, you know, again, it depends on taste, but I don't think of doing Robusta as a very dark roast. I don't think it tastes very good. I've tried it, and it's not my style. But if you'll notice on the beans, on the coloration, you'll have some light ones and some darker ones, because, you know, pan roasting isn't like the commercial coffee roasters today. So what I like about it, it gets back to basics, and it gets back to the old time way of doing things. So if you have some beans that's a little bit lighter, a little bit darker, the great thing is about that is you're tasting coffee the way it was done 100 years ago, 200, 300, even 500 years ago or further. And that's the way that it was done. And so if you really want that authentic taste out of your coffee, you can do it right at home. You can store, like I said, I have, you know, of course, lots of beans. And you can store it. Most people say store in a burlap sack. If you do plastic, you must make sure that it can get air to it. The coffee beans need stored just like you would flour or meal, cool, dry place, so that they'll keep, and they'll keep for years. And then just out of this one little cup, you know, I got a pretty good amount of coffee. And coffee beans actually get larger when they roast, and they'll lose approximately, the rule of thumb is about 10% of their weight, so they'll actually get lighter. And because of course you're roasting and you're taking out the moisture. Now, like I was saying on the Robusta, you really don't see a lot of parchment at all. So you know, what little bit of chaff, or what most people call chaff, there's just not a lot on there. So, you know, there again, what little bit's in the Robusta, I don't worry about it, trying to take it out, because there's just not a lot. You can see the oil on my fingers from the beans, and they're just beautiful. I love them. Okay, that's coffee roasting on Vietnamese Robusta, and I hope you enjoy it.